Hello everyone, this is Dr. Liberty Kohn, a Writing Center Director and English Professor, and in this video I will show you how to write a review of the literature. This is a genre used in all disciplines. It's a common assignment. We see it in the Writing Center all the time. And this short video I'm going to show you is going to give you a brief overview of the purpose and ways to write a review of literature. But mainly I want to show you examples from different fields so you can see the commonalities and also the small differences that are worth noting by field and that you might want to ask your professor about as you begin to start and then complete this assignment. So where do I start? Well, when I'm reading or writing for a review of the literature, and really it's important to read to write the review of the literature. You can't read as you always would. You want to read in certain ways. So there are many great online resources that go beyond this video if you need more support. Many universities have great advice. You can simply Google how to write a review of literature and you can find help beyond this video or different ideas that may connect with you as you're writing a review of literature. This is one of my current favorites right here, but you can see Purdue OWL, always a great resource. And other universities have lots of help on writing a review of literature. You should also visit with your professor. You're going to want to seek examples. If your professor has some, that's fantastic, or you can find some on your own. You could also visit the Winona State Writing Center, where the tutors have seen this very video that you're watching and know everything that this video knows. So let's talk about the purpose of a review of literature. It's not your average research paper. The purpose of a review of literature is to sum up the research findings or maybe the theories of a field. We'll just say the findings. And that could be a small subfield or an area of research. And this is just to see what a field knows. Eventually you might develop an insight or opinion on what the field knows and what it doesn't know, which is also important because that way you know what to research next or what the field should research next. So you might write a review of the literature just to sum up the answers to a particular question or a related set of questions in a field. A review of literature, for someone like me, a professor, makes me aware of the breadth of research findings or knowledge on a topic. So there are multiple good answers to a question, and I want to know what they are. Sometimes those findings will agree, sometimes they will disagree, but I want to know what they are nonetheless, right? It may not make its own argument, it might only summarize, but oftentimes the writer, the author of a review of literature, will point out where the agreement and disagreement is, and that's kind of open to interpretation in a way, even if it doesn't feel like you have a thesis necessarily. You may point out answered and unanswered research questions, you may point out gaps in the research, maybe your own research will one day fill that gap. That's also a use for the review of literature, to see what needs to be researched next, and then you go and you do that as an advanced researcher. It may help a researcher or student locate their own unanswered research question. So if you're not sure what to research, reading what is known and unknown can point you in the right direction as to what you might want to think about and what you might want to figure out for your field next, right? Or if you have figured out something or have an opinion, you can't just say, I figured this out. You have to say, here's what we knew, here's what we didn't know, and here's where what I found, my opinion or my research finding, fits in amongst everybody else's opinion in the discussion, right? Okay, so who's the audience for this? Could be professionals, could be students. The educational purpose is probably to have you read and write a lot of detailed research that goes beyond maybe the knowledge of a textbook. Textbooks don't always bring up the disagreements in a field, but a review of literature will definitely bring up the disagreements or the unknown elements of a field or a research question. So how do I start to read for a review of literature? You might ask, what is my research question? Or just what are you researching in general, and then narrow down to one specific question. And then you will begin to look for all of the relevant articles that are providing an answer to that question. So you might want to start with important articles. When I was taught to do this in graduate school, I always went to the main journals in a field that dealt with that question, and I looked at the most recent answers. I started in Time, in the current, and I moved backwards for 5 or 10 years looking for all the articles that seemed to be an answer to that question, because those were the most current findings in the field. So reading backwards from the major journals or major sources is a great way to undertake a review of literature. The other way to do it is to look at the most often cited articles. Sometimes you'll see an article that is 20 or 30 years old, or maybe even older. And that must be a really important article because people are still citing it after all this time. So you can look at the newest articles that are dealing with your topic, and then you can look at what they're citing. And the ones that you see consistently cited in newer articles are important, and you may need to read them yourself and see if they are also answering your question and put them in your review of the literature. All right, and so that's this group right here. How do you read? Well, you have to read for any answers that appear in any article. Now, you may read an article and you don't find anything that answers your question. That's okay. It's time to move on to a new article, right? But you should be reading specifically for answers to your question. That means you're repurposing the research. The original research article might have been answering even a slightly different question, but part of that research or theory also helps you answer your research question. And then you can use that article because it is helping you for your purposes, right? As you read, you need to read for patterns and subtopics to help you organize all of this research. And we're going to see that in the examples in just a minute. So, how's a review of literature like and unlike other forms of writing? You may wind up with something that is an opinion, but it won't feel like an opinion from a common research paper. Instead, you're finding where the agreement and disagreement is in a field, what was known, what is unknown, and then your opinion arises from those findings, right? So I think it's time to take a look at some reviews of literature from different fields. Let's note what they have in common, where they differ, where they agree, where they disagree. And let's look at the variance in form that you can have as well. All right, our first example, we'll start kind of right in the middle of the university in the social sciences, halfway between the humanities and liberal arts and the sciences. And let's just take a look. If we look at this, the first thing that you might notice right away that says, wow, there's a huge lit review here, is all of these fast citations, right? Look at them all. There's more over here. And so you might think, well, what an odd way to start an article, right? Or a research paper for school. But it's not when you think about the purpose of research. Remember, the purpose of research is to show I found this thing, and it needs to be layered on top of all of the previous knowledge of a field. All the things that either agree or disagree would be one way to look at it. There's so many happening here that what I would suggest here, all these citations are doing, is that each one of these cited studies taught this field one little thing. And then another study taught one more thing, and another study taught one more thing. And eventually, cumulatively, you get a big picture of what is going on in terms of this research question. We even get kind of a question right here, right? And so you can see that that's the function of all this research, is each one is a slightly different answer. And so you get one little idea that is a summary of that research. Now, you might be saying, why so much summary? Well, that's because all of these in some way support this finding. You may not need to have this many. We'll see other examples that do not have this many. But we can see that the way that this is structured, you're basically telling us everything that we know. Now, it seems like a lot of this agrees. I don't see a lot of dissent in here. I just see a lot of additions. First one thing was learned, then another thing, and another thing, and another thing, right? And we can see that happening here as well. Okay. Now here, it seems like we're changing perspective. We're starting to get some pointing out of what agrees or disagrees, or where changes happened in the understanding of the research. And we get that from this phrase right here, from the latter perspective. So there's different ways of understanding what's going on, or maybe even contradictory theory or research findings, right? But that's what a review of the literature looks like. Let's take a look at some other examples. Here's another from the same field. Notice that it starts out with a central assumption in the theory, and then it goes on to verify where this assumption comes from. And we've got lots of research cited and just very quick summaries of that. Yours may not always be that quick. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. Where the research has focused its energies, or we might just say its directions in research, positive outcomes. Maybe that means we're going to look at negative outcomes. Maybe that hasn't been done in the research, and that's what this article is getting at. But it's pointing out what research has been done, what have the findings been on, and of course, what have we not done yet. This person isn't identifying what has been done, and there may be areas the research has not looked into at all, and that's what's being pointed out here. Okay. Now, after this direction, notice that right here we start to get a new direction. Right here, actually. Recently, social structural features such as status hierarchy have been brought into the process a new area of research or a new direction for the theory. And so this writer is pointing that out, and then here is the support for it. And some of these ideas may also come from this research right here. And we're getting the new things that have been done in the field, right? Or at least a different direction of the field, if we don't want to think of it as the new things, but just a different direction for the research. And that's all grouped together, right? So this research moves in a different direction, answers the question differently than this research. Now, the interesting thing is, once it ends, right here, we get what this article is going to contribute to both of this research. So we're getting an announcement that there's a new thing coming, right? Contributes to this process in several ways, and this person is now outlining their own research and how it's going to fit in amongst all this old research. Okay, let's take a look at some different fields. Let's move to the sciences. Here is one compound of the food sciences. It is on moist meat, I guess we could say. Here's what I like about this one. Just look at the summary here. The aim of this review of the literature was to summarize some of the most important and novel hypotheses regarding the development of water holding capacity in pork. So it is saying we're just summarizing what's going on out there in the field. That alone is the purpose. They may not have a new finding. It's just to know what we know. Okay, let's take a look. I guess it's worth saying that in their summary, they're identifying, remember we talked about you have to read for patterns. Here, after reading all this research, are what these researchers, these readers, these authors found important. And they're starting to kind of list what they believe are the key factors after they read through dozens and dozens and dozens of research articles on this. Here's what they found to be the most important, and they're summarizing it for us. That is the one purpose, one big purpose of a review of the literature. They're finding that there's not always consensus, but some dissensus, right? Some disagreements. We get the however. They're telling us about more recent advances that they've found from newer research, perhaps, or a different line of research that challenges older findings, something like this, right? And then they're kind of summarizing those as they go. But notice that at key moments, they're making decisions as authors about what all this research means, what we know and what we don't know, what is new, what agrees, what disagrees amongst the body of research, right? And so we see that in their writing as well. And we would see it in their paper as well. I'll just show you really quickly now a pattern that you should recognize as a review of the literature. A lot of citations really fast that again is showing, I would suggest, where we want to begin the summary of the knowledge of this field and what people generally agree on probably in this field, although this is not my field. But it seems like we have one idea and it comes from here. We get another idea, right, that just builds on this one. It's not contradicting this one. So we're just layering ideas, adding in as we go all the things that we know in this field. Okay. By the time we get done with that, notice we get a little summary of each article, right? So here's a summary of these. We get a summary of these. We get a summary here, and then the citations very, very fast. And then we get a statement from the authors what all of these citations kind of add up to. You can't give your people too much summary without them saying, hey, here's probably where they all agree, or here's what this all means, right? So the authors are stepping in and telling us what this all means. And you would see that pattern fairly often. Probably at least once in a paragraph or every other paragraph, you as an author need to step in and say, this is what all of this means. And you probably need to control those ideas as you go as well, always shaping this other research to your goals, your research question. Okay. This is page 2, and I just want to show that we just start to see more reading and more summary of the articles, but also the interpretation of what this all means again. This results in numerous product defects. Now, this may come straight out of the research, or maybe this is what the researchers found from cumulative readings. But just notice they're controlling the information, right? In between what comes out of the article, they're framing it in a way that makes sense for their purposes in the project. You can see more from the research, more summary of research, and then the purple here, just so you can see it nice and bright. I put what they found from reading the research. This may not be their own insight. It may be what comes out of all of this research here, and that would be okay too. But they're summarizing the field and what it all means. They're making all of this make a big point, right? Notice they put it at the end of a paragraph, which makes sense, right? The last thing we get as we leave this section of review of the literature is what it all means. What are the big thing you want? What's the big thing you want the reader to know? All right, so there's yet another good example of lots of research fast that is reviewed and then made sense of somehow by the author themselves. I'd like to now move to the other end of the university from the hard sciences back to the liberal arts and humanities. This is one that's kind of right in the middle of political science, cultural studies, philosophy, English department, all of those type of things. And you can see here, though, the abstract is basically a short review of the literature. We've got the citations really fast about what the articles found. And then leading up to, after all of this, sort of the adding, we know this, we know this, we know this. Very briefly then, what is going to be found in this article right here. Now we also see that if we look through the beginning of the article here, you'll notice even in the writing of this article very, very fast, because this article talks about trust, also known as ethos, we see different opinions of ethos being added in. It might be pointing out contradiction or just what is agreed upon. And we see a lot of citations very quick, all summarizing different elements of what ethos is, building a base for a definition. You can't just use a dictionary definition, but the Lit Review is building the base of what trust is and how it works in political speech in this case. And we see that. And we see then right here, this author has said, moves beyond these older definitions of ethos that were just set up. Whatever your concept is for your paper, doesn't matter. This one just happens to be ethos trust. So this is what we knew. And here is a new scholar that's moving into new territory. Maybe a different definition or a different usage or a different situation. And so then we see that appear, and we see that happening again in this paragraph. These two scholars are probably similarly challenging or building upon the earlier presentation of what ethos is here, right? So some differences here. And then we start to get what this author is actually getting at right here. Okay, let's take a look at one more. Okay, I want to leave you with one more. You can see here that in the professions, a review of literature can be incredibly long and summarize all of the work in the field in a year. Okay, this one is going to be humor studies, and there's something unique about this one. All right, so this example, I'm probably 40 pages into the review of literature, all the research from the year that came out on a certain topic. What I want to show you in this one is that sometimes those summaries don't happen so fast. Most of the examples so far have been very, very brief summaries, maybe half a paragraph at most. Now, for some of the work that you'll be doing for educational reasons, I would suggest that maybe some of your summaries will be longer than that, and this is one professional article that does that. Now notice after 40 pages, there's just a setup here that shows, hey, I'm going to break into sort of a new direction of research. 2 articles of note that treat comedy and scripted big budget films, etc. So it's saying here's a new direction for the research right here. This one happens to be mine. But here's what I really want you to see. This review of the literature, look how long they summarized this article right here. A lot of the other summary happened very, very fast. But because this wants to do a good job of teaching the specifics of all of the articles, the important articles that came out this year, it takes a whole paragraph to summarize what it says. Okay? And so we see all of that summary of my article here that came out. You see my name, the author's name, referenced over and over here. Okay, and then we see a nice break from it right here, the other article in this set. So here's the other similar article, and we're going to get summary of that. And if we looked far enough, we can look and see like they only summarize the article. One thing they didn't do is say what this article and the previous article, which they chose to group together, what they had in common or how they were different or how they pressed into a new direction for the research. So this person maybe actually missed the opportunity to do that. They just paired this article with another and summarized them. They must have had a good reason, but they don't totally tell us. As an author, you might want to tell us what that is. Nevertheless, they found sort of what they believed was a sub-theme, and they grouped these articles together accordingly because they have something in common. Okay, I want to do one for the folks in the medical sciences as well. Here's one from a friend of mine who's an immunology specialist that publishes a lot. And he said I could use one of his because it's a good example of one thing that we're looking for in the medical sciences and potentially other disciplines. But here, I would suggest that the way things work again, kind of like some of our earlier pieces, is that everything is sort of adding up. Here's what we know, here's what we know, here's what we know. Then we learn this, then we learn this. So all these little bits and pieces adding up to the knowledge of a field. And therefore we get what feels like sort of a list of important things and then the citation. Right, so here's the picture slowly developing from years and years of research, even though we maybe just have a few key citations that really nail down that research. And then we see here maybe a traditional view, right, which means that here's one direction the research went in, and here's all of the research supporting this traditional view. And what we learned, of course, from these studies that became the traditional view. And that probably means that this article is going to in some way add to the traditional view or challenge the traditional view if it has its own research it's presenting. Or maybe the purpose of this article is just to show there's a different view of this research now that is not the traditional view, and they'll present other people's research to show that. They will summarize other people's research to show that. So it's hard to know unless we read the whole article, but we can see what this looks like. Again, this is a review of the literature, lots of reading, and sometimes it doesn't become a lot of writing. But I would suggest that for educational purposes, you check in with your professor and you say how much summary should we have in each paragraph. And maybe there's some examples, then that might be helpful. Because you can see some reviews of literature happen fast, and some, as in the humor studies piece, you have an entire paragraph of the summary of the source. So that is up to you to figure out and work out with your professor. Here's what we can say. How is the review of literature like and unlike other forms of writing? Well, a review of literature may not have an obvious argument, or at least it may not look like it has an argument or a thesis or an opinion, but it is you reading and therefore finding the patterns and summarizing in your particular way what you see important. As important, right? So your goal is to summarize what a field knows, what it doesn't know, maybe what different trends are, different directions for the research, answered questions, unanswered questions, how we should feel about findings. Those things are based to a great extent in opinion, even if it doesn't seem like it when you read it and it looks mainly like summary. So a review of literature might only explore what we know in a field. Short reviews are oftentimes standard when you present your own research finding leading up to a discussion of your findings. And again, the best thing to do is to ask your professor, am I leading up to my own opinion, or am I only summarizing the state of the field? Okay, everyone, that'll be it. Thank you for your time. Be sure to visit the Writing Center when you have time. We are happy to help you, and all of my tutors have watched this video. And I will just close by saying happy review of literature. Thank you.